In a perfect world, all the productivity tips we hear would work flawlessly. We'd wake up each morning and engage in 2 hours of focused work, we'd do 1 hour of exercise in the gym each day, and we'd journal, time block, and engage in all the other optimal habits until we finished our day with a relaxing 8 hours of sleep. The problem is, we don't live in a perfect world, and the perfectly balanced life most productivity authors adhere to is practical only for a very small minority of people. In this video, I'm going to use my 15 plus years of experience in entrepreneurship as well as my background as a peer-reviewed researcher in brain science and psychology to examine 5 of the top productivity books, show you why these approaches are unrealistic for the average person, and offer an emotional resilience approach to productivity that will actually help you achieve your goals, even if you work 80 hours a week, have no money, or are pulled in all different directions by your loved ones. The first book we'll examine is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Now, first off, let me begin by admitting that this book is one of the best books on habit development, not only because the approach Clear takes is in line with what actual research shows helps us develop new habits, but because of the practical way he delivers the information. For that reason, by all means, please do read this book if you haven't already. It'll help give you the steps to develop new habits you want to develop, like exercising and eating healthy, and his discussion on the concept of a keystone habit, or in other words, a small habit that makes all other good habits easier to develop, is extremely insightful. In fact, I credit this book with helping me become more and more consistent with my own exercise routine. The key, Clear states, is in taking small steps, and this is precisely what he means by atomic habits. If you want to start exercising, for example, literally just start with 1 push-up 5 days per week. This simple action will start to get you used to the routine of getting down on the ground at a specific time of day and doing that push-up. Over time, you can gradually build up to 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour of exercise, whatever your goal is. There is a dark side to this method of habit formation, though, and it's one the Stoicism YouTuber Ryan Holiday has aptly pointed out. Routines are fragile. Building these habits relies on having a stable environment, and when that environment goes from stable to unstable, it can create a lot of anxiety and totally derail us. For example, imagine this very likely scenario that many people face. You get up each morning with the greatest intentions. You have committed to do 5 minutes of exercise every day by running on the treadmill. You've even made it really easy for yourself to implement this habit by controlling your environment. You've decluttered the room your treadmill is in, you've set up your workout clothes next to your bed so you can put them on immediately when you wake up, and you've even started getting to sleep earlier each day so you have the energy in the morning to do it. And this routine works pretty well for a few weeks. Everything seems to be going great, but all of a sudden, your boss tells you to start coming in earlier or leaving later, your mother gets sick and you have to go to her house 3 days a week after work to make sure she has what she needs, and you just got a letter saying you have to do jury duty for the next 6 weeks. What do you think happens to your routine at that point? Exactly. It probably falls apart. It's the same thing that happened to my aunt when my grandparents started to need more care. She suddenly had to visit my grandparents several times a week to deal with medications, groceries, and other household chores, all while she was working in corporate full-time. And it's what happened to me about 7 years ago when my mom slipped on ice, cracked her ribs, and had to have a major surgery, all while I was totally broke and in the middle of trying to build my business. Have you ever faced situations like these? I'm sure you have. Well, all these perfect habits that we set up for ourselves are so dependent on our environment. And because our environment isn't entirely within our control, we experience failure after failure to set up and keep good habits that eventually we get frustrated and give up entirely. The key then is not to rely too heavily on our environment. We have to focus on building up a system of emotional resilience that will help us maintain progress and momentum toward our goals, no matter what obstacles get in our way. And we'll flesh out this system of emotional resilience as we progress through this list. The next book we'll examine is the book Deep Work by Cal Newport. This book is also well worth the read as it really gets into how to tap into what are called flow states. These are states of intense and also enjoyable focus in which the work we're doing feels almost effortless. I've experienced that so many times myself, most notably when I was writing my first book book on value theory back in 2013. This project required me to read literally hundreds of books and articles in this field, but because I absolutely loved and still love this field, the work didn't feel draining. In fact, I would go for hours and hours researching, taking notes, formulating ideas, and then writing and proofing, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in my life. Have you had similar experiences? What kind of work do you find yourself getting lost in that you could do for hours? Well, this is the essence of deep work. And as Newport argues, getting into these states is key to having optimal productivity. In fact, using the concept of deep work is how I scripted this entire video. I literally sit for 4 to 5 hours in one time block every Monday to completely write an entire video script from start to finish, and I use a 2 to 3 hour time block every week prior to that time block to do deep work for the purposes of researching whatever I need to research to create that script. The problem with this, you probably thought it before I even said it. Most people don't have 4 to 5 hour uninterrupted time blocks. For most people, unless you're a freelancer or working from home with no kids, setting up long periods of time to get into deep work is a huge challenge. And how about people with ADD, ADHD, or problems with what's called executive function? And these aren't extremely rare issues either. Many of us, due to a variety of factors that aren't easily controllable, suffer from some degree of executive dysfunction, meaning, very simply, we have trouble maintaining effective control over our decisions, such as planning, organizing, and, as it sounds, executing behaviors we want to act upon. For example, for people with ADHD and executive function issues, working in shorter time frames rather than the long time blocks often required for deep work can actually be more effective. But ultimately, as we stated before in our review of Atomic Habits, if we're going to maintain progress toward good habits we want to develop, we can't become dependent on our environment. We have to focus on emotional resilience that will help prevent us from becoming too upset or discouraged by distractions and setbacks. In the case of those with executive dysfunction or ADHD, practices such as meditation can actually go a long way toward helping us develop this resilience, because not only does meditation help us emotionally ground ourselves, but it's one of the easiest practices to implement because it doesn't require any planning and it can be done at virtually any place and at any time. When it comes to solving the issue of not having enough uninterrupted time to time block longer sessions for deep work, there's a solution for that too, and we'll take a look at that as we examine further books on this list. The next book we'll examine is The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. Now, this book definitely has a unique approach to productivity among productivity authors. Ferriss is a huge proponent of automation, delegation through the use of technology, and lifestyle design through the use of gradual tactical maneuvers in the workplace. Okay, I'm definitely gonna oversimplify his ideas here and not do justice to them, which is why you should read the entire book. But essentially his argument goes like this. Identify your purpose and the worst of your fears holding you back. Next, with that knowledge, gradually negotiate with your boss to work from home. Then automate undesirable tasks in your life by hiring virtual assistants. Next, launch a product or service online that dumps money into your bank account while you're sleeping. And then, finally, become a digital nomad and do whatever the hell you want, whenever you want. Having essentially engineered this remote nomad lifestyle for myself already, I can honestly say that a lot of what Ferriss discusses here is on point. For example, he makes the very valid point that you don't have to be a millionaire to travel around the world full-time and in style. Once you're fully remote and not spending most of your time at a primary residence, and you calculate all the costs of living in various places a few months at a time, the costs of living definitely can, as he shows, actually save you money. Also, creating a product or service online and gradually automating it is definitely the way to go, although he does make it sound a lot easier than it actually is. While the finished result, a fully automated business that runs without you, is technically possible, I believe Ferriss has what in psychology is called unconscious competence. In other words, he doesn't seem to realize that what is now extraordinarily easy and almost effortless for him, i.e. the development of a product and establishment of automated systems, is, in fact, extraordinarily time-intensive and often financially risky for most people. That's not to say you shouldn't take his advice. It's simply to say that if you're going to follow this advice, understand it's gonna take a lot of time, effort, and energy upfront to get the same results he and others like him have achieved. Another problem Ferriss's approach suffers from is this. It's really only doable for people who work in corporate with fixed working schedules. People like nurses, those working in retail, or people who work as police officers, construction workers, etc., cannot gradually shift their work to fully remote. Furthermore, people who work these types of jobs are often told what their schedule is every week and don't have the luxury of being able to predict their schedule beyond a week. But there's a solution to this problem too, as we'll discuss shortly. And that brings us directly to our next book on this list, Essentialism by Greg McKeown. In this book, McKeown promotes the very valid idea of streamlining our focus. In order to be more productive and get more things done that are actually important in our lives, he states, we have to learn how to say no more often. Right on, I totally agree. This is something we're all uncomfortable doing, but we have to practice doing it more often. However, once again, we don't live in a perfect world, and saying no and streamlining our focus can seem almost impossible for many of us. Let's once again imagine that same scenario we discussed before with you developing that habit of getting on your treadmill. Imagine though that this time you're really looking to change your life. You're fully committed to it, in fact. And this time it's going to be different. You're finally going to start your new business and make it work. But once again, your family member gets sick, management changes at your company and now starts giving you more work for the same pay. You have 3 kids and a family depending on you, and you just developed some joint pain that's constantly hurting you, but you have no time to go get it checked out. Despite your commitments, what do you think is going to happen to your new business now? Delayed yet again. And if nothing changes, delayed forever. Yet again, we don't want to be dependent on our environment. But in this kind of situation, how could we not be dependent on our environment? Well, in this case, you now have extremely limited choices, and every choice you can possibly make has a bad outcome. Most people don't want to hear this, but in a situation where you're torn between family obligations and work obligations, and there's literally no room left for obligations you have to yourself, emotional resilience looks like having the courage to make radical change. That might look like quitting a 6-figure income job. It might look like leaving your toxic spouse. It might look like selling your house and downsizing so you can make things work. As Tim Ferriss says, we often imagine the outcome as worse than it actually is. But ask yourself, if you're stuck in a situation like this where you're being pulled in all different directions, would the outcome of your radical decision actually be as bad as you imagine? And this takes us to our final book on this list, Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal. Again, I'm not able to fully do justice to Abdaal's book here, which is why it's best you go and read it in full. And quite honestly, it's really a fresh perspective on productivity. I love how Abdaal argues against the grind culture mentality, discusses how to enter flow states as we discussed before, and touches on the power of visualization. His discussions of the sources of procrastination were really helpful for me to reflect on the reasons I procrastinate on certain things, and his tips on how to avoid burnout are genuinely useful also. But again, just like Ferriss, when you've achieved the epitome of financial and time freedom like Abdaal has, it's very easy to forget what most people's lives are really like. For example, his tips on making our work more playful or gamifying it are not that practical for most people, seeing as though more than 20% of workers in the US currently describe their jobs as socially useless. How exactly do you turn a socially useless job into something playful? And when he discusses burnout, he highlights the importance of not doing too much or taking on too many tasks at once. Fair enough, but just as in some of our previous examples, how exactly would that be possible, for instance, for a single mother of 3 working 4 jobs to put food on the table? I think Abdaal's most powerful point in this book is actually his discussion on the importance of social connection. So far, we've discussed a lot about the pitfalls of making our routines and productivity dependent on our environment, but this is one area of our environment we should gradually seek to control more and more. But it's one that a lot of people struggle with. In In fact, the US Surgeon General has in recent years labeled loneliness a mental health epidemic. According to a wealth of social cognitive research, our peer groups definitely play a huge role in our productivity and habits. That being said, if you're in a toxic home environment, even seeking out online groups can be helpful to keep you on track and help you develop emotional resilience. So at the end of the day, if routines are fragile, our environment isn't always completely in our control, and emotional resilience really is a key factor we should learn to hone and control, then where should we start? Well, I'll share here a simple system that's worked for me time and time again when I've started to feel overwhelmed by problem after problem that would otherwise derail me and put me back into bad habits. In fact, I credit this very simple system with helping me get out of a six-figure student loan debt, and I call it the problem solution system. Oh, and there is a lot of good science on the fact that this does work, since it's technically a form of journaling which has been extensively studied. It goes like this. Take out a sheet of paper. I feel paper works best for me, and there's also some research showing that it may actually work best in general, but if using a tablet or something else works for you, go for it. Make 2 columns on your paper. On the left side, write problems at the top, and on the right side, write solutions at the top. Now, simply write out all the problems or things causing you anxiety in your mind. Once you've listed out all those things, list out 2 to 3 potential solutions on the corresponding row for each problem. That might be a phone call or text you need to make, a difficult conversation you need to have, or some part of a difficult project that needs to get done. The key here is to identify one that you can take action on and either do it right away, for example, if that's like a call or a text, or schedule it into your calendar to be done at a specific time. The reason this works is that it gets our problems out of our mind, onto paper, and into an action sequence. The simple fact that we've clarified an action and scheduled it gives us a huge sense of control, which gets us back on track emotionally. How will you start using this strategy, and what small steps will you take today to create more emotional resilience so you can accomplish your goals? If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to take control of your life, then be sure to watch this next video.